At my husband's funeral, my daughter-in-law laughed and said, "Too bad the old lady isn't going with him. She'll keep being a burden." My son said nothing. The next day, they found out the truth about the will. I'm glad to have you. Here, follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The words cut through me like a knife as I stood there in my black dress, my hands trembling around a white handkerchief Frank had given me on our 40th anniversary. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Astrid's voice wasn't even particularly quiet. She didn't care if I heard her. What crushed my soul was Lance's silence. My only son, the boy I had rocked to sleep through countless fevers, taught to ride a bike, and helped through college applications, just stood there. Not a word in my defense, just silence. The funeral home was filled with people paying their respects to Frank, my husband of 45 years. The polished oak casket was surrounded by arrangements of white lilies, Frank's favorite. He always said, they reminded him of our wedding day. Now their scent mingled with the suffocating smell of grief and artificial air freshener. I looked around at the blur of faces offering condolences. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Viola. Frank was a wonderful man. Let us know if you need anything." Empty words from people who would forget about me by tomorrow. The only person who truly cared about me was lying in that casket. Frank had been my protector, my confidant, my shield against the world's cruelties, especially those from our own family. He was the one who would squeeze my hand under the dinner table when Astrid made her subtle digs about my outdated clothes or how I was too old-fashioned to understand modern parenting. He was the one who stood up to Lance when our son began canceling our weekly dinners because Astrid had suddenly made other plans. "Mom, are you okay?" Lance approached me, Astrid trailing behind him with that plastic smile that never reached. Her eyes. She was beautiful in the conventional way. Blonde hair, perfectly styled even for a funeral. Designer black dress that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage payment. The perfect grieving daughter-in-law for appearances. "I am fine," I lied, wondering if he had heard what his wife had said. Of course he had. He just chose to ignore it, like he'd been ignoring the way she treated me for the past 7 years since they'd married. "You should sit down." "You look pale," Lance said, his hand barely touching my elbow. When had he become so uncomfortable? With touching his own mother? I said I'm fine. My voice came out sharper than intended. Lance immediately withdrew his hand, exchanging a knowing look with Astrid as if to say, "See? She's being difficult again." The rest of the funeral passed. In a haze, I sat in the front row, my body present, but my mind drifting between memories of Frank and the harsh reality of my new existence. Alone. A burden. The old lady who should have died instead. That evening, I returned to our empty house. The silence was deafening. For 45 years, this home had been filled with Frank's booming laugh, his off-key singing in the shower, the sound of his favorite Western movies playing too loudly because he refused to admit his hearing was going. Now there was nothing. I walked through each room, running my fingers along his things. His reading glasses on the nightstand, his cardigan hanging on the back of his armchair, his coffee mug in the dish rack. All these items waiting for an owner who would never return. In our bedroom, I opened his closet and pressed my face into his shirts, breathing in his scent, a mixture of aftershave and that indescribable essence that was uniquely Frank. My knees buckled, and I sank to the floor, finally allowing the tears to come. Not the restrained, dignified tears I'd shown at the funeral, but gut-wrenching sobs that tore through my body. "What am I going to do without you?" I whispered into the empty room. "They don't want me here, Frank. Our own son doesn't want me." As my tears subsided, my eyes fell on Frank's old mahogany desk in the corner of our bedroom. He'd always been so particular about that desk, joking that it was the one place in the house that was his sanctuary. I hadn't opened it since he'd fallen, ill 3 months ago. With shaky legs, I stood and walked over to it. The top drawer stuck slightly, just as it always had. Inside, neatly organized as Frank had always kept it, were our important documents, birth certificates, insurance policies. And there, in a sealed envelope with my name written in Frank's unmistakable handwriting, was his will. I stared at it, my heartbeat quickening. Frank had told me everything was taken care of, but he'd never shared the details. "It's all sorted, Vi," he'd said from his hospital bed, squeezing my hand. "Just remember that I always knew more than I let on." I held the envelope, feeling its weight in my hands. Tomorrow we'd meet with Frank's lawyer for the official reading. Lance and Astrid would be there, undoubtedly ready to divide whatever Frank had left behind. They had no idea what was in this envelope. Neither did I. But something in Frank's final words to me, something in the way he'd squeezed my hand and looked into my eyes, told me that my husband had one final act of protection to offer. I placed the envelope back in the drawer. Tomorrow would come soon enough. Tonight, I would grieve alone, the burden who had lost her only ally in a family that no longer wanted her. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly as I prepared for the reading of Frank's will. I put on the same black dress from the funeral, my fingers fumbling with the zipper. Frank had always helped me with that. I arrived at Harold Winter's law office 15 minutes early. Harold had been Frank's friend since high school and his lawyer for over 30 years. His office was small but elegant, with dark wood paneling and the comforting smell of old books. "Viola," Harold greeted me with a gentle hug. "How are you? Holding up?" "I'm here," I replied, which was the most honest answer I could give. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Lance and Astrid haven't arrived yet. Would you like some coffee?" I accepted the cup with trembling hands, more for something to hold than any desire to drink. My stomach had been in knots since I'd found the envelope in Frank's desk. I hadn't opened it. Somehow it felt wrong to read it before the official reading, but its existence had kept me awake all night. The door opened, and Lance and Astrid swept in like a cold breeze. Lance in his expensive suit, Astrid in a black dress that looked more appropriate for a cocktail party than a will reading. Her red-soled shoes clicked aggressively on the hardwood floor. "Mother," Lance greeted me with a stiff nod. Astrid didn't bother with even that pretense of respect. "Now that everyone's here, shall we begin?" Harold gestured to the chairs arranged in front of his desk. I sat in the middle chair with Lance and Astrid to my right. The physical distance between us felt symbolic of the emotional chasm that had grown over the years. Harold cleared his throat and opened a folder. "This is the last will and testament of Franklin James Spencer, revised and signed 6 months ago." 6 months ago. Right after Lance and Astrid had convinced Frank to put his name on a loan for them to renovate their already extravagant house. Frank had agreed, but I remembered how troubled he'd looked afterward. "I'll start with the basics," Harold continued. "To my beloved wife, Viola Marie Spencer, I leave our family home at 1842 Maple Street, free and clear of any mortgage or encumbrance." Astrid shifted in her seat, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on her designer handbag. "Additionally, to Viola, I leave full ownership of Spencer's hardware and supply, including all assets, inventory, and the commercial property at 156 Main Street." The tapping of Astrid's nails stopped abruptly. Lance's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Harold," continued, his voice steady. "To my son, Lance Franklin Spencer, I leave my collection of vintage fishing gear and the sum of $10,000. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. "That's it?" Lance's voice cracked. "The fishing? Gear? After everything?" Harold held up a hand. "There's more." Frank left a letter to be read aloud. He pulled out an envelope identical to the one I'd found in Frank's desk. My heart raced as Harold began to read. "To my family, if you're hearing this, Then I've moved on to wherever good hardware store owners go when they're done fixing things. In this world. Harold's voice softened, capturing Frank's gentle humor. I've made choices in this will that may surprise some of you, but they shouldn't. Viola has been my partner in everything for 45 years. The store was never just mine. It was ours. She kept the books, ordered inventory, and knew every customer by name even when I forgot. I felt tears welling up. Frank had never said these things to me directly. He wasn't one for flowery words or grand declarations. Lance and Astrid, I know. You'll be disappointed. You've been expecting to inherit the store and sell it to that developer who's been sniffing around. I know about the plans you've discussed, the debts you've accumulated, and the way you've treated your mother when you thought I wasn't looking or listening. Lance's face had turned ashen. Astrid's carefully composed expression cracked, her eyes flashing with fury. Viola deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. She is not a burden to be tolerated but the heart of this family. My hope is that this will forces you both to recognize that fact. Harold folded the letter and looked up. The silence stretched for one heartbeat, then two. Before Astrid exploded, "This is ridiculous." She stood up, her voice shrill. "That business is worth over $1 million. He promised Lance would take it over." Harold remained calm. "No such promise appears in any legal document, Astrid." "He must have been manipulated," Lance said, looking at me with accusing eyes. "Dad would never have cut me out like this. Mom must have influenced him when he was sick." The unfairness of his accusations struck me like a physical blow. I had spent the last 3 months of Frank's life being gradually excluded from his hospital room, with Astrid insisting that too many visitors would tire him out. I'd sat in waiting rooms while they had private conversations with my husband. "Your father was of sound mind when he signed this will," Harold stated firmly. "And I can personally attest that Viola had no undue influence. This was Frank's decision, made with clear understanding of his assets and his wishes." Astrid turned to me, her beautiful face contorted with rage. "You conniving old woman! You turned him against us." "Astrid," Lance cautioned, though whether he was concerned about her behavior or just the impression it would make on Harold was unclear. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, Frank's letter echoing in my mind. He had known. All those times I thought I was protecting him from knowing how they treated me, he had seen it all. "There are additional documents regarding the business transition," Harold continued, seemingly unfazed by Astrid's outburst. "Frank left detailed instructions about operations, vendor relationships, and staffing recommendations." "This isn't over," Astrid hissed at me as she grabbed her purse. "Lance is his only child. We'll contest this." Harold sighed. "You're welcome to try, but I should warn you that Frank anticipated that response. This will is ironclad, and contesting it would only drain your resources with very little chance of success." Lance stood up, straightening his suit jacket with shaking hands. "Mom, you need to be reasonable about this. Dad wasn't thinking clearly. You know I was supposed to take over the business. It's always been the plan." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. The boy who had once brought me dandelions and homemade cards had been replaced by this man who saw me as nothing but an obstacle to his inheritance. "The reading is concluded," Harold announced. "Viola, please, stay a moment to sign some paperwork." Lance hesitated, then followed Astrid to the door. He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "We'll talk about this at home, Mom. You need to do the right thing for the family." After they left, Harold handed me a glass of water. "Are you all right, Viola?" I took a sip, my throat dry from unshed tears. I had no idea Frank knew how they treated me. Harold's kind eyes crinkled with sympathy. "Frank knew everything. He came to me 6 months ago, worried about Lance and Astrid's spending habits and the way they'd been isolating you. He wanted to protect you." "They'll never forgive me for this." "This isn't your doing, Viola. It was Frank's decision. But as I signed the papers that made me the owner of a hardware store I'd helped build but never expected to run, I knew the battle was just beginning. Lance's words echoed in my ears. You need to do the right thing for the family. The question was, after years of putting everyone else first, what was the right thing for me? 3 weeks passed since the reading of Frank's will, and the silence in my house was deafening. No calls from Lance, no visits, not even a text message asking how I was doing. It was as if I had died alongside Frank, except I was still here, moving through the empty rooms like a ghost. I stood in our kitchen, my kitchen now, staring at the phone that refused to ring. Part of me wanted to reach out to Lance, to try to mend whatever was left of our relationship. But another part, a stronger part that sounded suspiciously like Frank, whispered that I'd spent too many years being the one to smooth things over. The hardware store had become my unexpected sanctuary. I'd always helped with the bookkeeping and ordering. But now I found myself there every day, learning the parts of the business Frank had handled. The familiar smell of paint, timber, and metal tools wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. Mrs. Spencer, where do you want these new drill sets displayed? Joe, our longest-serving employee, appeared with a box in his arms. He'd worked for us for over 20 years and had been visibly relieved when I told the staff I wouldn't be selling. Let's put them on the end cap near the register, I said, surprised at the confidence in my voice. 3 weeks ago, I wouldn't have had an opinion on merchandise placement. Joe nodded approvingly. Good thinking. That's prime real estate. As he walked away, I felt a small glow of pride. Maybe I could do this after all. Frank had believed I could. That much was clear from his will. The bell above the door jingled, and I looked up to see Patricia Wilson, my closest friend, entering the store. She'd been checking on me regularly since the funeral, bringing casseroles I couldn't eat and offering company I wasn't sure I wanted. There you are, she exclaimed, making her way to the counter where I stood. I went by your house, but you weren't there? Again? I managed a small smile. The store keeps me busy. Patricia studied my face. You look better. Not good, but better. Thanks, I think. She glanced around the store, lowering her voice. Have you heard from Lance? The familiar ache returned to my chest. No. Patricia's eyes flashed with anger. That boy needs to get his priorities straight, his own mother, for heaven's sake. I sighed. It's Astrid. She's always had him wrapped around her finger. Speaking of your delightful daughter-in-law, Patricia said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I ran into her at Nordstrom yesterday. She was returning a cartload of designer clothes. Said something about unexpected financial adjustments. Twinge of guilt hit me. Had Lance and Astrid really been counting that heavily on inheriting the store? Then I remembered Astrid's words at the funeral, and the guilt evaporated like morning dew. They've made their choices, I said, more to convince myself than Patricia. The bell jingled again, and Harold Winters walked in, his briefcase in hand. My stomach tightened. Lawyers rarely brought good news these days. Viola, he greeted me, warmly. Do you have a moment to talk privately? Patricia squeezed my arm. I'll call you later, she promised, before making a discreet exit. I led Harold to the small office in the back, Frank's office. I still couldn't think of it as mine, though. I'd been working there for weeks now. Frank's presence lingered in every corner. The coffee mug ring on the desk, the faded fishing photos on the wall, the worn leather chair that still held the impression of his body. What's wrong? I asked as soon as the door closed behind us. Harold set his briefcase on the desk. Nothing's wrong, but there are some matters we need to discuss. He pulled out a folder. I've been going through Frank's personal files and I found these. He handed me a stack of papers. Bank statements, credit card bills, loan applications, all with Lance and Astrid's names. What am I looking at? I asked, though a sinking feeling told me I already knew. Evidence of financial trouble, Harold said gently. Lance and Astrid have been living well beyond their means for years. That home renovation loan Frank co-signed? It wasn't their first. They've been taking out loans, maxing out credit cards, and borrowing against Lance's future inheritance. I flipped through the papers, my heart growing heavier with each page. $75,000 for a boat? $30,000 for a kitchen remodel they did just 2 years ago? A timeshare in Aspen? The numbers swam before my eyes. How did Frank get these? Harold looked uncomfortable. Frank hired a financial investigator about 8 months ago. He was concerned about some comments Lance had made about needing to liquidate the store assets after Frank was gone. My hands trembled. He knew they were waiting for him to die so they could sell the business. He suspected, Harold corrected gently, and he wanted to make sure you were protected. That's why he revised his will. I set the papers down, suddenly exhausted. What do they expect me to do? Hand over a business that Frank and I built from nothing so they can pay off their debts and keep living beyond their means? Actually, Harold hesitated. Lance called me yesterday. He wanted to know if you'd be willing to meet with them. To discuss the will? To discuss their financial situation. They're in trouble, Viola. That renovation loan is coming due, and without the expected inheritance. I felt a flicker of the old maternal instinct, the urge to rush in and fix things for my son. But Frank's words from the will echoed in my head. Viola deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. What would Frank do? I asked softly. Harold smiled sadly. Frank already did it. He protected you, knowing it might cause a rift with Lance. The question now is, what will Viola do? I looked around the office at the business Frank had entrusted to me. Then I thought of our home, sitting empty and silent while I threw myself into work to avoid the loneliness. Tell Lance I'll meet with them, I said finally, but not at their house and not at mine. Somewhere neutral. Harold nodded. That's fair. And Viola, remember that you don't owe them anything. Whatever you decide, it should be on your terms. After Harold left, I sat in Frank's chair, running my fingers over the worn armrests. For the first time since his death, I opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the one he always kept locked. Inside was a leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. I opened it with trembling fingers and recognized Frank's handwriting immediately. It wasn't a traditional journal, but more of a record. Dates, observations, and notes about Lance and Astrid. He'd been keeping track of their behavior toward me for years. October 15th. Lance canceled dinner with Viola again. 3rd time this month. Astrid claimed migraine. Saw them at Romano's restaurant later that evening. Viola waited 2 hours with pot roast getting cold. December 25th. Astrid gave Viola a size small sweater. Viola is clearly a medium large. When? Viola couldn't get it on. Astrid suggested a New Year's diet. Lance laughed. Viola pretended it was fine. It wasn't. The entries went on, page after page of small cruelties and deliberate exclusions that I had endured, minimized, and excused. Frank had seen it all, recorded it all, and ultimately acted to protect me from more of the same. I closed the journal, pressing it against my heart. Frank had known more than he'd let on, just as he'd said in his final days. He'd known, and in his own quiet way, he'd loved me enough to ensure I wouldn't face their callousness alone. Tomorrow, I would meet with Lance and Astrid. But tonight, in the silence of our home, I felt Frank's presence stronger than ever, guiding me toward a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I chose Patricia's cafe for the meeting with Lance and Astrid. It was public enough that they would have to maintain some level of decorum, yet private enough in the back corner booth for our conversation to remain confidential. Patricia promised to keep an eye on things from a distance. My personal guardian, angel armed with coffee pots and scones. I arrived 20 minutes early, my stomach in knots. Frank's journal sat in my purse like a talisman, though I had no intention of revealing its existence. Some truths were better kept close to the heart. Patricia brought me a cup of chamomile tea without asking. "You look like you need it," she said, squeezing my shoulder. Lance and Astrid arrived precisely on time. My son looked tired, the crisp confidence of his usual appearance somewhat dulled. Astrid, on the other hand, was as immaculately put together. As always, though I noticed her designer handbag was missing its usual place on her arm. "Mother," Lance nodded stiffly as they slid into the booth across from me. Lance, Astrid. I kept my voice neutral, neither warm nor cold. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Patricia appeared with menus, giving Lance and Astrid a look that could have frozen boiling water before retreating. "I see your friends are as charming as ever," Astrid muttered. I ignored the jab. "Harold said you wanted to talk." Lance cleared his throat. "Yes, well, we've been doing some thinking about Dad's will." "And?" I prompted when he paused too long. "It's not fair," he blurted out. "Dad always said the store would be mine someday." "You know that?" I took a slow sip of my tea. "Your father made his wishes very clear in his will." Astrid leaned forward, her voice taking on the saccharine tone she used when trying to manipulate a situation. "Viola, we understand you're grieving. We all are. But surely you can see that Frank's decision wasn't rational. He was ill, confused." "Frank was perfectly lucid until the day he died," I interrupted, surprising myself with my firmness. "And he made his decision with full awareness of the circumstances." Lance's face flushed. "What circumstances? What are you implying?" I thought of the journal in my purse, of all the documented instances of their callousness. I thought of Astrid's comment at the funeral and Lance's damning silence. "I'm not implying anything," I said carefully. "I'm simply stating that your father made his decision consciously and deliberately." Astrid's mask of sweetness slipped. "You turned him against us. Admit it." "I did no such thing." "Then explain why he would cut his only son out of his inheritance." Her voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. I set down my teacup, with deliberate calm. "Perhaps you should ask yourselves that question." Lance's expression shifted from anger to something that might have been shame, quickly suppressed. "Mom, we're in trouble," he admitted, his voice lower. "The loan Dad co-signed. It's coming due next month, and we don't have the money. We had planned to use our inheritance to pay it off," Astrid added, as if the money had already been theirs. "I see," I said, though what I really saw was the trap they had laid for themselves, expecting Frank's death to solve their financial problems. "We need your help," Lance said, not quite meeting my eyes. "If you could sell the store, or even just part of it." "No." The word came out quietly, but firmly. "Mom, please?" "The store is not for sale," I said, my resolve strengthening with each word. "Not now, not ever." Astrid's face contorted with anger. "You selfish old—" "Careful," I warned, surprising myself again with my steady voice. "Think very carefully about what you say next, Astrid." She pressed her lips together, visibly restraining herself. "If you won't sell," Lance tried again, "could you at least take out a loan against the business? Help us get back on our feet?" Studied my son's face, searching for the boy I had raised. The boy who had once made me a Mother's Day card with buttons and yarn, who had cried when he thought he'd disappointed me with a poor grade. Where had that child gone? "No," I said again, but gentler this time. "I won't enable this behavior any longer." "Behavior?" Lance's eyebrows shot up. "What behavior?" "The irresponsible spending. The expectation that someone else will always bail you out." I looked directly at Astrid as I continued. "The disrespect toward me that has become the norm in this family." Astrid scoffed. "Disrespect? We've included you in everything." I nearly laughed at the blatant lie. Have you? When was the last time you invited me to dinner without Frank insisting? When was the last time you called just to check on me, not to ask for something? Lance shifted uncomfortably. Mom, that's not fair. Isn't it? I reached into my purse and pulled out a small photo album I'd brought. I found this while cleaning last week. I opened it to a page showing Lance at his college graduation, his arm around me, both of us beaming with pride. Do you remember what you said to me that day? Lance stared at the photo, his expression softening slightly. I said I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you said I was your rock, that you hoped you'd made me proud. I turned the page to a family photo taken at Christmas 5 years ago before Astrid. We were close once. What happened, Lance? He glanced at Astrid, then back at me. Nothing happened. Life just changed. Life didn't change, I corrected gently. Priorities changed. People changed. Astrid rolled her eyes. This is pointless. Are you going to help us or not? I closed the album and placed it back in my purse. I am willing to help, but not in the way you're asking. Lance looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. What do you mean? I'll offer you a job at the store, I said. Both of you, if you want. Decent salary, regular hours. You can learn the business from the ground up, the way your father did. The way I did. The hope in Lance's eyes died. You want us to work for you? As employees? As family, I corrected. Working together to preserve what your father built. Astrid let out a harsh laugh. You can't be serious. Lance has an MBA. I have a degree in interior design. We're not going to work in some dusty hardware store. I nodded, having expected this reaction. That's your choice. But it's the only help I'm offering. Lance's face hardened again. So that's it? You're just going to let us lose our house? The maternal instinct to protect my child surged again, but I pushed it down. You're adults, Lance. The consequences of your choices are yours to bear, not mine. Astrid stood abruptly. This is a waste of time. Come on, Lance. My son hesitated, looking at me with a complex mixture of anger, disappointment, and something else. Perhaps a glimmer of recognition that I was no longer the doormat they had come to expect. Think about my offer, I said as he rose to follow his wife. It stands if you change your mind. Astrid was already halfway to the door, but Lance paused. Did Dad really know? About how things were? I thought of the journal, of Frank's detailed observations. Your father saw more than he said. Lance nodded slowly, a flash of shame crossing his face before he turned to leave. Patricia appeared at my side the moment they were gone. You okay, honey? I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath. I think I am. You stood your ground, she said, approval evident in her voice. Frank would be proud. As I sat there, finishing my now cold tea, I realized something important. For years, I had measured my worth by my ability to keep the peace, to sacrifice my needs for others, to be the perfect supportive wife and mother. But perhaps true strength wasn't in sacrifice, but in boundaries, in knowing when to say enough. On the table, my phone buzzed with a text message. I expected it to be from Lance or Astrid, perhaps with a final angry word or desperate plea. Instead, it was from Joe at the store. Customer looking for that special order garden trellis. Did Frank leave the supplier info somewhere? I smiled faintly, gathering my things. The store needed me. Life was continuing, with or without Lance, and Astrid's approval. And for the first time since Frank's death, I felt a small spark of something that might eventually grow into happiness. I left money for the tea and walked out into the sunshine, my steps lighter than they had been in weeks. The words that had gone unspoken for too long had finally been said, and in their wake was not the disaster I had feared, but a strange, liberating clarity. Frank had given me more than a business. He had given me the chance to find my voice again. 2 months after our confrontation at the cafe, life had fallen into a new rhythm. Every morning, I woke at 6, made coffee in the still quiet house, and arrived at the store by 7:30 to review orders before opening. The routine anchored me in a world that had been turned upside down by Frank's death and the subsequent family fracture. I hadn't heard from Lance since. That day, no calls, no texts, not even a message through Harold. The silence hurt more than I cared to admit, but I was learning to live with it. The store was thriving under my care. To my surprise, I discovered I had a talent for retail management that even Frank hadn't fully tapped. I'd started hosting do-it-yourself workshops on weekends, bringing in new customers who might otherwise have gone to the big box stores outside town. The first one, basic plumbing repairs, had drawn just 7 people. The most recent, on building raised garden beds, had packed our back room with 32 eager participants. "Mrs. Spencer, there's someone here asking for you," called Melissa, the college student I'd hired to help with the weekend rush. Her tone was strange, cautious. I looked up from the inventory spreadsheet I was updating and felt my heart stutter. Lance stood awkwardly by the register, looking thinner than when I'd last seen him, his usual polished appearance slightly rumpled. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet. I closed my laptop and stood. "Lance, this is a surprise." He glanced around at the store, taking in the new display arrangements and the colorful flyer advertising our upcoming workshops. "The place looks different. Change can be good," I replied, unsure where this conversation was heading. He nodded, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Could we talk? Somewhere private?" I led him to the office, closing the door behind us. My office, had changed too. I'd replaced the dark curtains with lighter ones, added a small plant on the windowsill, and hung a bulletin board filled with thank you notes from workshop participants. "How have you been?" I asked, gesturing for him to sit. Lance remained standing, his hands jammed into his pockets. "Not great," he admitted. Astrid left. The news hit me like a physical blow. Whatever I had expected, it wasn't this. "Left? When?" 3 weeks ago. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Said she didn't sign up for financial struggles and downsizing." I sat down heavily in my chair. "I'm sorry. Are you?" His eyes met mine, challenging. "Yes," I said simply. "Despite everything, I never wanted you to be hurt." Something in my tone must have reached him because his defensive posture softened slightly. "We lost the house. The bank foreclosed last week. Where are you staying?" "Tom's couch," he said, referring to a college friend. "It's temporary." The silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken accusations and regrets. Part of me wanted to rush in, to offer solutions and comfort, as I always had, but Frank's journal entries flashed through my mind, reminding me of the patterns we had fallen into. "What do you want, Lance?" I asked finally. He exhaled heavily. "I've been thinking about your offer, the job." I studied my son's face, searching for signs of sincerity versus desperation. "Why now?" "Because I have nowhere else to go," he admitted bluntly. "And because maybe Dad was right. Maybe I need to learn some things the hard way." It wasn't the heartfelt apology I might have hoped for, but it was honest, and honesty was a start. "The job offer still stands," I said carefully, "but there would be conditions." Lance nodded, waiting. "You'd start at the bottom. Stocking shelves, helping customers, learning the inventory, the same way your father and I did." "I understand. And," I continued, "you'd need to find your own place to live. I'll help with a loan for the security deposit on an apartment, but you'll repay it from your salary." He looked surprised. "You're not offering to let me move back home?" "No. The Word came out more firmly than I intended, but I didn't soften it. That's not what either of us needs right now. Lance's eyebrows rose slightly, a flash of the old entitlement surfacing. I thought you'd be happy to have me back. I'm happy you're here, I clarified. I'm happy you're considering the job, but we both need our own space to figure out who we are now. He frowned. Who we are? Mom? I'm still me, and you're still you. I shook my head. No, Lance. I'm not the same person I was when your father was alive. And from the looks of it, you're changing too. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Frank that my heart ached. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Do what? Start over, rebuild, be whatever it is I'm supposed to be now. For the first time since he'd entered the store, I saw my son, not the entitled adult who had allowed his wife to mistreat me, but the little boy who had once looked to me for guidance when he felt lost. Nobody knows how at first, I told him gently. You just take it one day at a time. Is that what you've been doing? I nodded. Every day I wake up and decide who I want to be now that I'm not just Frank's wife or your mother. I'm discovering there's more to me than I realized. Lance looked around the office, taking in the changes I'd made. Dad would be surprised. Maybe, I said. Or maybe he knew all along what I was capable of. Maybe that's why he left me the store. Lance was quiet for a moment, digesting this. When can I start? He asked finally. Monday. 8 o'clock sharp. Joe will show you the ropes. He nodded, then hesitated. Mom, about what Astrid said at the funeral, about you being a burden. I held up a hand to stop him. I don't need an apology for what Astrid said. I need acknowledgement of what you didn't say. His face flushed with shame. I should have defended you. Yes, you should have. But that's in the past now. What matters is where we go from here. As Lance left, promising to be on time Monday morning, I felt a curious mixture of hope and caution. This wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation with tears and hugs and promises that everything would be perfect. It was tentative, fragile, conditional, but it was a beginning. That evening, as I closed up the store, Patricia stopped by with dinner, a container of homemade soup and fresh bread. How are you holding up? She asked, helping me turn off the display lights. Lance came by today, I told her. He's taking the job. Patricia's eyebrows shot up. Well, I'll be. And what about the queen bee? Astrid left him. They lost the house. She let out a low whistle. Can't say I'm surprised. That woman was never going to stick around when the money ran out. She studied my face. How do you feel about it? I considered the question carefully. Cautiously optimistic. He's humbled. But he's not broken. And neither am I. Patricia smiled, linking her arm through mine as we walked out together. No, Viola Spencer. You certainly are not broken. In fact, I'd say you're stronger than you've ever been. As we stepped outside into the cool evening air, I realized she was right. The invisible woman, the one who had been so easy for Lance, and Astrid to dismiss, to talk over, to treat as a burden, was gone. In her place stood someone new, a business owner, a mentor, a woman coming into her own power after decades of living in someone else's shadow. And if Lance was truly willing to see this new version of his mother, perhaps there was hope for us yet. A year had passed since Frank's funeral. The seasons had cycled through their changes, summer heat giving way to autumn's crisp embrace, winter's cold stillness melting into spring's renewal. And I had changed too, in ways both subtle and profound. The anniversary of Frank's death fell on a Sunday. I closed the store for the day, something Frank would never have done, and drove to the cemetery alone. The headstone was simple, elegant. Franklin James Spencer, beloved husband, father, and friend. I placed a bouquet of lilies against the cool marble and sat on the small bench nearby, You'd be surprised by how things turned out, Frank, I said softly. Talking to him had become a habit over the past year, a way of processing the changes in my life. The store had its best quarter ever. Those workshops I started are bringing in customers from 3 towns over. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree shading his grave. Lance is doing well. He's managing the floor now, training the new hires. He has a small apartment near the store. Nothing fancy, but it's his, and he's paying for it himself. I paused, running my fingers over the smooth stone. No word from Astrid. I think she's in Phoenix now, based on what Lance mentioned. He doesn't talk about her much. The cemetery was peaceful, the silence broken only by birdsong and the distant sound of traffic. It was a good place to reflect on how far we'd all come. Lance had surprised me over the past year. The entitled, defensive man who had first come asking for a job had gradually given way to someone more thoughtful, more aware. He had started at the bottom as agreed, stocking shelves and cleaning the store after hours. There had been rough moments, times when his old sense of entitlement surfaced, when he chafed against taking direction from staff who had less education but more experience. But he had persisted, learned, grown. 3 months ago, I'd promoted him to floor manager. He'd earned it. Our relationship had changed too. Gone was the old dynamic where I catered to his needs while he barely acknowledged mine. We were finding a new balance, not quite friends, more than just employer and employee, slowly rebuilding a mother-son connection based on mutual respect rather than obligation. He reminds me of you sometimes, I told Frank's headstone. He has your focus when he's solving a problem for a customer. Your laugh, too, when he forgets to be guarded. I stayed a while longer, sharing other news. Patricia's granddaughter's college acceptance, Joe's retirement, plans, the expansion ideas I was considering for the store. It wasn't the same as having Frank beside me, but there was comfort in these one-sided conversations. As I drove home, my phone rang. Lance's name appeared on the car's display. Mom? His voice sounded strange, tight. Where are you? Just leaving the cemetery. Why? Could you come by my place? There's something I need to talk to you about. Alarm fluttered in my chest. Is everything all right? Yeah, it's fine. Just important. 20 minutes later, I parked outside Lance's apartment building. It wasn't in the upscale neighborhood where he and Astrid had lived, but it was clean and well-maintained. A modest second-floor unit in a complex populated mostly by young professionals and small families. Lance opened the door before I could knock. Thanks for coming, he said, ushering me inside. His apartment was small but tidy, furnished with a mix of new, inexpensive pieces and a few items I recognized from his old life. The leather armchair Frank had given him for his 30th birthday, family photos in simple frames. No sign of Astrid remained in the decor. Tea? He offered, already moving toward the kitchen. Please. As he prepared the tea, I noticed a cardboard box on the coffee table, its flaps open to reveal what looked like old photo albums and papers. Lance returned with 2 mugs, handing one to me before sitting across from me. I've been doing some cleaning, he said, gesturing to the box. Found some things I thought you might want to see. He reached into the box and pulled out a leather-bound book that made my breath catch. It was identical to the journal I had found in Frank's desk. You knew about this? I asked. Lance nodded. Dad gave it to me about 3 months before he died. Told me to read it after he was gone, that it would help me understand some things. My hands trembled slightly as I set down my mug. Did you read it? Not until after Astrid left. His eyes met mine, filled with a sorrow that seemed to reach beyond his years. I should have read it sooner. Maybe things would have been different. Maybe, I agreed. Or maybe you weren't ready to hear what it had to say. He pulled something else from the box. A manila envelope, worn at the edges. I found this with the journal. It's addressed to you, in Dad's handwriting. I took the envelope, my name written in Frank's familiar script across the front. Inside was a letter, dated just 1 week before he died. Vi, it began. If you're reading this, then Lance has finally found the courage to face some hard truths. I hope it didn't take him too long. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. I've known for years how they treated you when they thought I wasn't looking. At first, I confronted Lance privately, man to man. He made promises to do better, to stand up to Astrid. But he was weak where she was concerned, and nothing changed. I considered confronting them both directly, making a grand stand, in your defense. But you know me, I've never been one for dramatic gestures. And I worried that forcing the issue might drive Lance further away, might make things even harder for you. So I made a different plan. I changed my will, yes. But more importantly, I left Lance the journal and instructions to reflect on the kind of man he was becoming. I knew that losing the inheritance might be the wake-up call he needed. Sometimes we have to lose everything to remember what truly matters. I'm sorry I won't be there to see how it all unfolds. But I know you, Viola. You're stronger than anyone. Gives you credit for, perhaps even stronger than you know yourself to be. You'll find your way through this, and maybe, if he's lucky, Lance will find his way back to being the son we raised. All my love, always, Frank. I folded the letter carefully, pressing it against my heart as tears flowed freely down my cheeks. Even now, a year after his death, Frank was still looking out for me, still trying to mend the family he had left behind. Mom, Lance said softly, I'm so sorry. For everything. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw genuine remorse in his eyes. I read every entry in Dad's journal, he continued. All the times Astrid insulted you, all the times I sat by and did nothing. All the dinners we canceled, the holidays we ruined, the countless small cruelties. His voice broke. I didn't want to believe I could be that person. But you're not that person anymore, I said gently. He shook his head. I'm trying not to be, but I can't change what I did or didn't do. I can't erase the hurt I caused. I thought of Frank's letter, of his hope that Lance would find his way back. No, you can't erase it, but you can acknowledge it. You can learn from it. You can do better going forward. Do you think you could ever forgive me? The question hung in the air between us, raw and vulnerable. I reached across the space and took his hand. I already have, Lance. Forgiveness was never the issue. Trust is what we need to rebuild. He nodded, squeezing my hand. I'd like that. If you're willing to try. I am. We sat in silence for a moment. Not the strained, awkward silence of our earlier encounters, but something more peaceful, more honest. There's one more thing, Lance said finally, reaching into the box again. He pulled out a small wrapped package. Today's an anniversary, but it's also something else. I unwrapped the package to find a small silver frame containing a photograph I hadn't seen in years, Frank and me on our wedding day, young and radiant with hope. Happy birthday, Mom, Lance said softly. I know with everything that happened last year, we all forgot. Dad would never have forgiven me for missing it 2 years in a row. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I laughed through my tears. He was right. In the chaos of Frank's death and all that followed, my 70th birthday had passed unmarked, uncelebrated. Thank you, I whispered, tracing the outline of Frank's face in the photograph. I was thinking, Lance said hesitantly, maybe we could start a new tradition. Sunday dinner. Nothing fancy, just family. I looked at my son, at the man he was becoming, and felt something warm unfurl in my chest. Not the blind, unconditional love of a mother who refuses to see her child's flaws, but something deeper and truer, the beginnings of a relationship between equals, built on honesty and respect. I'd like that, I said. As I drove home that evening, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and purple. Frank's letter rested in my purse, his final gift to me, not just the store or the financial security, but this chance for healing, for rebuilding what had been broken. The house was quiet when I arrived, but it no longer felt empty. I moved through the rooms, turning on lamps against the gathering dusk, and felt Frank's presence not as a ghost, but as a foundation, the solid base upon which I was building this new life. On the mantel, I placed the framed wedding photo next to a newer one, a candid shot Patricia had taken at the store's anniversary celebration last month, capturing Lance and me laughing together behind the counter. "We're finding our way, Frank," I said to the quiet house, "just like you hoped we would." The silence that answered me was no longer the silence of loneliness or grief. It was the silence of peace, of acceptance, of a woman who had discovered her own strength and was no longer afraid to use it. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.